Breaking reports from the deepest corridors of power confirm that an unprecedented absolute purge has just been finalized behind locked doors. A historic strike executed not on a battlefield, but within the suffocating quiet of Buckingham Palace. This was not a routine administrative update. It was a ruthless seizure of authority designed to rewrite the line of succession and erase an entire branch of the royal house. Deep within a soundproof chamber, guarded by senior legal officers standing like stone sentinels, the atmosphere was thick with the weight of judgment. King Charles sat beneath the dim glow of antique chandeliers, staring down at a leather portfolio stamped with the gold leaf of the sovereign seal. His fingers, heavy with the ring of state, hovered over the parchment. The ink on the paper was dry, waiting only for the single stroke that would annihilate years of diplomatic ambiguity and deliver ultimate exile to his own son. Every breath in the room felt strained, heavy with suffocating tension. Beside the monarch, two top crown lawyers stood frozen, refusing to make eye contact. The document before them was an institutional death sentence for the Sussex household. It did not merely request an apology, it formally stripped Meghan Markle of her Duchess title, dismantled every remaining royal patronage, and severed Prince Harry from official crown representation forever. A hidden, lethal clause embedded within the text explicitly banned them from using their residual status in any commercial venture implying royal authority. As Charles gripped the pen, his knuckles turned white. For one agonizing second, his eyes lingered on a faint memory, a ghost of a young Harry running through the gardens of Balmoral, and his hand visibly trembled. But duty asserted its grip. The pen touched the paper. The signature was carved into the document with slow, agonizing deliberation. When it was finished, Charles dropped the pen onto the table, turned his back to the room, and stared out the high window, refusing to watch as the heavy red wax seal was pressed into the parchment. Observing from the shadows stood Prince William, his posture rigid, his face an unreadable mask of iron determination. To the world, William was the dutiful heir, but to those inside the chamber, his presence carried the weight of an architect. As the legal officers lifted the decree, William's sharp gaze drifted to the desk where a second, undisclosed black folder lay beneath the signing portfolio. He watched his father's hand pause over that hidden file, hovering with deep dread. In that nonverbal hesitation, a silent signal passed between the king and his successor. William knew the public revocation of titles was merely the first strike. The true devastation lay concealed inside that second folder, a hidden ledger of surveillance notes, constitutional contingency plans, and legal restrictions designed to ensure the Sussexes could never again challenge the authority of the crown. 5,000 miles away, in the quiet luxury of California, the shockwave landed with violent precision. The digital draft arrived without warning. Meghan read the opening paragraph twice, her eyes scanning the formal language. The color drained completely from her face, leaving behind a cold, hollow composure. She looked up at Harry, who stood near the window, his posture collapsed, staring at the floor. When she asked him, her voice dangerously quiet, if he had known this was coming, his absolute silence was more damning than any confession. The decree was not conditional. It contained no provisions for review and no room for negotiation. The monarchy had shut the door and bolted it from within. Harry's failure to foresee the trap exposed the terrifying reality. The institution had moved with cold, systemic finality to dismantle their identity. What the world witnessed as a constitutional necessity was, in truth, the catastrophic culmination of 4 human souls locked in a war of betrayals. Charles believed he was serving as the ultimate guardian of an ancient throne, sacrificing fatherly love to preserve the crown. William viewed the purge as a vital act of self-defense for his future reign, convinced that compromise only nourished insubordination. Across the ocean, Harry stood paralyzed in the wreckage, realizing his father had chosen the cold machinery of state over the bond of blood. And Meghan, gazing at the document that sought to strip away her title and commercial platform, saw the ultimate validation of her worst fears, an untouchable, ancient apparatus, delivering the absolute rejection she had always known was waiting in the shadows. Behind gilded paneling, 4 individuals were locked in 4 distinct realities of betrayal. Charles sat alone in his study before the briefing, holding a faded photograph of a young Harry at Balmoral. His thumb brushed over his son's face, a silent gesture of aching grief. Yet the moment the heavy doors turned and Prince William stepped inside, Charles flipped the frame face down onto the desk in a single, swift motion. That nonverbal act betrayed the fracture within the sovereign. As a father, he longed to protect his youngest son. As king, he knew the institution could not survive the toxic ambiguity of split loyalties and unauthorized branding. William noted the hidden photograph immediately, his eyes darkening, but said nothing. He placed a thick dossier on the desk, a brutal audit detailing every failed compromise of the preceding 3 years. William's posture was rigid, his voice lacking warmth as he laid out the crown's strategy. He had systematically dismantled every softer alternative presented by advisors. A temporary settlement regarding commercial rights had exploded into public disputes over global branding. A second agreement concerning ceremonial appearances had degenerated into bitter debates over precedence. A third proposal had raised legal questions about who possessed constitutional authority to speak for the realm. To the future king, compromise was no longer a bridge to peace. It was a tactic of delay that allowed a parallel royal court to flourish across the Atlantic. William believed with terrifying clarity that every concession weakened his future reign, creating a precedent that threatened the hereditary principle itself. In Montecito, the atmospheric weight was suffocating. Across a secure video line, Meghan sat frozen, her hand hovering above the screen where the formal decree was displayed. Her expression hardened before emptying of all emotion. Beside her, Harry pulled the document closer, staring at his father's official signature. When Meghan asked whether his silence during secret palace communications had permitted this execution to take place, the silence that followed was agonizing. Harry opened his mouth to defend himself, but no words came. His jaw locked, and he averted his eyes. That failure to speak became a knife through their alliance, planting a suspicion in Meghan's mind that her husband had sensed the approaching blade and done nothing to shield her. Even within Buckingham Palace, warnings echoed in secret. Queen Camilla confronted Charles in a private conversation preserved strictly within classified household logs. She warned him that while stripping Meghan's titles might protect corporate authority, it would permanently sever the last thread of blood reconciliation with Harry, sacrificing a son to appease the institutional beast. Charles listened in grim silence, refusing to retract the order. The point of no return had already been crossed months earlier during a secret gathering at Windsor Castle, a shadow summit disguised as a family reconciliation. Charles had convened the Windsor summit in total secrecy, barring press officers and personal aides. He sought to resolve 3 existential questions: whether the Sussexes would attend state ceremonies, how their children would remain connected to the lineage, and whether titles could be monetized abroad. Harry had walked into the room carrying hope, but that hope was obliterated when William spoke. William declared that no royal could claim independence while trading on the divine authority of the crown. When Harry defended Meghan, William cut him down. Freedom could never exist without institutional responsibility. Charles then pushed a document across the table, a non-disclosure undertaking demanding absolute silence regarding private family correspondence. Meghan asked why reconciliation required silence. Charles replied, "Trust cannot survive when private words become public ammunition." In defiance, Meghan produced her own document, an unsigned commercial proposal bearing the Sussex title beside the phrase Independent Global Royal Platform. Pointing directly at those words, William demanded their removal, accusing them of usurping authority they no longer held. Meghan refused, declaring that the palace did not own their identity. When Harry warned that restricting them would force them to publish correspondence exposing their mistreatment, Charles abruptly ended the meeting. Meghan pushed her chair back, leaving the unsigned contract behind. Harry remained seated for 3 silent seconds, locking eyes with his father, before following her out. As the heavy door closed, William picked up the abandoned proposal, placed it before the king, and whispered, "This will never stop until the crown makes it stop." 48 hours before the royal seal was pressed into the decree, the true climax of the conflict unfolded far from the public eye, inside a private sitting room at Clarence house. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and rain, heavy with an intolerable silence. There were no press secretaries, no constitutional lawyers, and no polished public relations advisors present. Only a monarch and his second son facing each other across the divide of an unbroken bloodline. Harry had demanded this final audience, driven by desperation, believing he could still halt the momentum of the institution. But before a single word could be exchanged, the boundary was drawn. Harry insisted that Meghan join the discussion via a secure video feed from California. Charles, standing motionless beside the fireplace, delivered his first absolute refusal. The king insisted the meeting remain strictly between father and son. He knew that previous encounters had collapsed under the pressure of competing loyalties and external advisors, and he would not permit the sanctity, or the tragedy, of this confrontation to be recorded, negotiated, or observed. Stripped of his legal vanguard and isolated from his wife's counsel, Harry sat forward, his body rigid with years of accumulated fury. The opening volley was not a plea for mercy, but a scathing accusation. Harry accused his father of performing a humiliating public execution of Meghan's status merely to satisfy Prince William and palace courtiers who had never forgiven her independence. His voice cracked with emotion as he declared that Meghan was being judged not for her failures, but for refusing to be crushed beneath the palace machinery. He warned Charles that revoking her title would prove to the world that the monarchy viewed his wife as a disposable asset, easily discarded once she refused to conform. Across the low mahogany table, Charles did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. His composure was that of a man who had already endured every conceivable form of grief and had arrived at cold, immovable certainty. When Charles responded, his tone carried the quiet terror of absolute authority. He did not defend William, nor did he enter into a debate over Meghan's character. Instead, he laid bare the systemic reality that Harry had refused to confront. The king explained that every attempt at compromise over the past 4 years had been systematically dismantled by public disclosure. Every private family gathering had been turned into broadcast material. Every intimate letter had been transformed into legal or commercial leverage. Charles noted that reconciliation was impossible when every gesture of paternal warmth was converted into material for public pressure. The crown, he declared, could not survive if its innermost sanctum was continually exposed to commercial exploitation. Harry, consumed by indignation, struck the wooden arm of his armchair with an open palm. The sharp bang echoed through the quiet room. "Look at me," Harry demanded, his eyes burning. "Look at me as your son, not as an administrative problem." The king slowly raised his eyes. The light from the hearth caught the profound exhaustion etched into his face, but his gaze remained steady. "I am looking at both," Charles replied softly. Those 5 words delivered a catastrophic emotional strike. In that single sentence, the illusion of a family negotiation shattered forever. Harry's face emptied of anger, replaced by a hollow, crushing realization. His father still loved him as a son, yet fully recognized him as an existential threat to the crown. The monarch had swallowed the father. Hope collapsed in the silence that followed. Lowering his head, Harry offered his final, desperate surrender. He proposed that he and Meghan would formally renounce the commercial use of their Royal Highness styling, provided they retained the Sussex titles, and continued to receive invitations to major state ceremonies. It was a massive concession, a plea to preserve the last tangible thread connecting them to the throne. Yet Charles remained motionless. With painful directness, the king revealed the ultimate truth. The proposal came too late. The decree had already passed through rigorous constitutional and legal validation. Senior law officers had signed off on the statutory mechanics, the parliamentary precedents had been aligned, and the administrative machinery of state was already in motion. Only one thing remained: his signature. This meeting had never been a negotiation. It was a final opportunity for farewell. Overwhelmed by bitterness, Harry rose slowly from his seat, convinced that his elder brother had orchestrated every legal maneuver from Kensington Palace to secure his permanent exile. But as Harry turned toward the heavy doors, Charles spoke one last time, halting him in his tracks. The king revealed that the primary force behind the final decree was not William. The decisive recommendation had come from a figure Harry had never suspected: Princess Anne. As head of the classified royal review panel, the Princess Royal had spent weeks meticulously auditing every breached agreement, every commercial license, and every public grievance. Anne had presented the final file to Charles in solitude, sliding the record of failed compromises across the table with unyielding clarity. When the king had asked his sister if any alternative remained, Anne had held his gaze and delivered the final verdict. There were other ways. They were all refused. Armed with that unassailable institutional logic, Charles had accepted the inevitable. Harry stood paralyzed at the door, realizing that the entire crown, his own blood, his father, his aunt, and the institutional guard had united to cast him out. He pulled open the door and stepped into the shadowy corridor, leaving the king sitting alone in the quiet darkness, holding the unbearable burden of a kingdom preserved at the cost of a son. In the cold dawn following the execution of the decree, a silent, terrifying efficiency swept through the administrative nervous system of the monarchy. What had been decided behind locked doors was translated into digital and legal reality with surgical precision. Within hours, official royal registries were altered, patronages formally revoked, and household staff reassigned. On the Crown's global digital portals, the entries for the Sussex household were quietly edited, their titles stripped away, and their profiles reduced to minor footnotes. There were no public debates or lingering announcements, only the cold, swift removal of identity. In London, sovereign officials carried out the instructions with emotionless compliance, proving that the ancient institution operates not on sentiment, but on cold, unyielding mechanics. The erasure was absolute, signaling to the world that once the crown casts a light out, it does so with terrifying finality. Inside Kensington Palace, the atmosphere was suffocating despite the apparent triumph. Prince William stood at his desk, staring out over the foggy gardens, holding the official notification of the decree's execution. He had achieved the ultimate objective he had fought so ruthlessly to secure, the protection of his future reign and the total neutralization of a competing royal court. Yet, the victory carried a dark, oppressive weight. The sibling bond that had once defined his public and private life was now permanently severed, transformed into a historical relic. In securing the stability of the throne, William had accepted the mantle of a cold ruler, realizing that the crown demands the sacrifice of personal affection for institutional survival. Beside him, Catherine observed his silence, understanding that the burden of the crown had already descended upon his shoulders long before his actual coronation, a heavy, relentless mandate that left no room for regret. For King Charles, the aftermath brought no satisfaction, only a profound, solitary stillness. Alone in his private quarters at Clarence House, the sovereign sat before an ancient mahogany desk, surrounded by portraits of monarchs who had made similar merciless choices throughout history. He took a single sheet of plain paper and wrote a final, handwritten letter to his younger son. The note contained no legal commands, no royal titles, and no institutional justifications, only the soft, aching words of a grieving father attempting to reach across an impassable abyss. He folded the parchment, placed it inside an unsealed envelope, and wrote a single word on the front: Harry. Yet even as he placed the letter inside a drawer, Charles knew the tragic reality. The sovereign had triumphed over the father, and no personal letter could undo the constitutional boundary he had drawn with his own hand. Across the Atlantic, in the heavy silence of Montecito, the reality of total powerlessness settled over the Sussex residence like a shroud. Meghan sat before the expansive windows overlooking the ocean, holding the final formal notification from the Privy Council. The titles were gone, the royal platform dismantled, and the illusion of an independent global court shattered. The freedom she had sought was now absolute, but it had arrived wrapped in the cold fabric of institutional ejection. Beside her, Harry walked through the quiet halls, stripped of the military appointments, ceremonial roles, and royal standing that had defined his entire existence. He was no longer a prince operating within the framework of a dynasty. He was an exiled son, floating in the vastness of private life. The power they had attempted to leverage against the palace had evaporated, leaving behind only the stark realization that the monarchy's authority was untouchable, while their own was entirely derivative of the crown they had challenged. As news of the final decree filtered out into the global consciousness, the world watched in stunned fascination as an ancient drama played out in modern time. Commentators endlessly debated the justice of the punishment, crowds gathered outside palace gates, and opinions fractured across nations. But within the walls of Buckingham Palace, the noise of the public storm was met with absolute, unyielding silence. The crown continued its relentless forward march, indifferent to public commentary or private heartbreak. Engagements proceeded, state business was conducted, and the dynasty adjusted its ranks to fill the vacuum. The losing side was left with the crushing weight of fatalism, the realization that against a 1,000-year-old institution designed to outlast empires, individual ambition and personal grievances are ultimately crushed beneath the wheels of historic continuity. In the final analysis, this dark chapter stands as a timeless testament to the ruthless nature of elite intrigue and sovereign power. Thrones are not preserved by mercy. They are sustained by unyielding resolve and the willingness to discard even those who share the sacred bloodline. The Sussex royal chapter has ended not with a compromise, but with a total, irreversible shift in the balance of power. A stark reminder that in the cold chess game of dynasties, the crown always wins. As history turns its page on this historic shift, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an update.